So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This afternoon we are on Pop Talk 4 of Series 5. And with us this afternoon we have Nicky Park, who is the Director of Women's Services at St Giles Trust. Thank you for joining us, Nicky.
Thank you.
So this afternoon's talk is based on communication, and that communication being through a trauma-informed lens. So I'm going to hand you over to Nicky now. There will be time for questions at the end, and there is a PowerPoint attached which we can send out as well. So Nicky, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. So as Jamie said, my name is Nicky Park. I'm Director of Criminal Justice and Women's Service Development at St Giles. I'm also our trauma-informed lead. I lead on all of our pieces of work around embedding it within our organisation. So although today the session is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour around kind of trauma-informed and trauma-informed communication, but there may still be content that triggers. So please do, if that is the case, take time out for self-care, whether that is during the session or afterwards. It is so important. So today, we are looking at communication through the lens of trauma-informed. Next slide, please. And today, what I want us to be able to focus on, and hopefully for you to leave here with, is a better understanding of the impact of non-verbal communication, so what our body language tells people, as well as our verbal communication around how our words, whether that is both spoken but also written, and how they can have an impact on how people perceive themselves and perceive others. Next slide, please. So with all my trauma-informed pop talks, my working definition is Bessel van der Kolk's definition on trauma as an inescapable, stressful environment that overwhelms people's coping mechanisms. So this is from his book, The Body Keeps the Score, which you will all receive handouts afterwards, which has resources, and it has a link to his book. But it's about that trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal or extreme situation. And for some people, particularly women, the trauma is a threat that builds over time. Next slide, please. So I'm first going to look at non-verbal, and our definition for non-verbal communication includes things like pitch, speed, tone, volume of voice, gestures, facial expressions, body posture, stance, proximity to the listener, eye movements and eye contact, dress and appearance. There are parts of our communication style that we may not be aware of. For example, we often don't think about our non-verbal communication, about our body language, and that it can send a powerful message to others. Some non-verbal cues, such as frowning or shrugging shoulders, whether you are sitting leaning towards someone or sitting away from them. Research shows that 60 to 90% of our communication with others is non-verbal, which means that body language is extremely important, especially in our line of work. In addition, it's essentially important to make a good first impression. So why is that? Well, because a large part of our judgment of others is visual, within the first few minutes of meeting someone, we are already making decisions about what the other person's intentions are and whether the person is credible and someone we want to trust and work with. This means your client's first impression of you will steer their level of honesty and engagement. As we go through the next slides, please keep in mind a client that you have engaged with who at times might show behaviour such as what we would describe as being aggressive or dismissive or rude. And as we go through these slides, what I would really like you to do is hold a trauma-informed lens to those behaviours. Next slide, please. So, our body language and the experience of trauma can affect survivors' own body language as well as their interpretation of body language of others. So the impact of trauma can be evident in, so here are some examples: hunched shoulders, poor eye contact, looking down at the floor, being startled easily, involuntarily covering body parts, being quick or darting movements and wide-eyed expressions, tension in their shoulders, neck, face. I'm sure with this trauma-informed lens that you are putting on these are not unusual behaviours that you will have experienced. So, next slide, please. How can these be interpreted? So there are types of behaviours that we might see as being warm and friendly, but those who are experiencing those may see them as threatening. An example of this might be clients that you have who have been in abusive relationships, who have been abused as children by those who care for them, who have been groomed through childhood criminal exploitation, because being warm and friendly is how those who exploit the vulnerable groom their victims. So actually, it's not seen as something that is warm and friendly as we might have initially wanted it to. Interpreting direct eye contact might be a signal of hostility. Neutral facial expressions could be seen as angry. For those who have been brought up through, again, abuse within their childhood, through neglect, might have had indifference from parents that actually showed that parents were angry with what they were. There was no other emotions, and so they no longer see that as a neutral expression. And touch can be seen negatively. So it's really important that if we think about how not only can we perceive others' behaviour, but also how we look at our own. So I thought that I would give you a few then tips on what you can do. So next slide, please, Jamie. So it's really important that you reflect and learn what your body language is. So in my case, I often use my hands. I have a really awful poker face. And it's only really since COVID and doing more meetings online that I have realised how poor my poker face is, and that I need to really, really work on that. But it allows me to reflect on that behaviour, and it allows me to go, actually, what would someone else have thought if they were looking at me? Would I have come across as if I was really disinterested in what they were saying? What are my gestures like? Am I showing that I am actively listening to someone because of how my body language is, that I am turned to show that it's an open conversation and I'm open to listening? And so with that, it's how we adapt our body language to show that empathy, to remove anything that might be deemed as being aggressive, but also to use our client's body language as a way of communicating to us. So to listen to our client's body language and paying attention to also our own body language and how our clients might respond to that. So it might be that all of a sudden they start becoming more agitated and nervous, and it's important for us to be able to recognise that, to listen to those signs and potentially end the session early before their behaviour becomes more. So almost taking agitation, nervousness, anxiousness as a bit of a warning sign of what could become. I'm sure we have all been working with clients who have been convicted of an offence because they responded to a situation. So an example is, I remember working with a client who was in for arson because he had set fire to the bin outside the housing office because he was so frustrated with the response that he was getting from the housing office, as in the computer says no. And that was how he responded to that. So I guarantee that man would have shown early warning signs of his agitation and his frustration before it got to that point. So for us, it's how do we get to stop him, prevent it from getting to that. But it's also really important to remember that your interpretation of a client's body language is just that. It is an interpretation, because reading nonverbal communication is not an exact science. It is more about understanding than mind reading, that through open and clear communication, we can ask them about their own experience rather than acting on our own assumptions, which at the end of the day are often only hunches or are based on previous people's experiences of either that person sitting in front of you or your experiences with other people who might have responded in the same way, but for very different reasons. Next slide, please. So moving on then to verbal communication. And the verbal communication definition is very much around the sounds and the words that we use to express ourselves. But they are not just words as in spoken words, they are also very much the written word, which in cases where clients can now ask to see their OASIS reports, their case notes, their sentence plans. And sometimes, and I remember when I first started many years ago, reading OASIS reports and seeing how someone is described and labelled. And if I had read that about myself, what would that impact have had on me as a person? But also, what would the impact have been on my relationship with the person who wrote that report? Next slide, please. So it's all about the power of language. That language can be used to destigmatize, can be used to normalize an individual's behavior and responses to a traumatic experience. That often our clients can be misunderstood and labeled as difficult to work with, needy, hard to engage, to name but a few. But it is so important for staff to shift their thinking from what is wrong with this person and what is the matter with you to what has happened to this person and what matters to you. It is important for us to take that shift because every form of behavior is a form of communication, and it is telling us that something has happened to this person. Please ask. It is important for us to recognize that when someone walks through our door, whatever has happened to them previously, whatever they have heard being said about them, any names that have been called them, or actually any situation that might have triggered a behavior in them, doesn't just leave them at the door. It's not a magic door. So when they come and sit in front of you, their world and everything that's going on in their minds is still very much going on in their minds. And that means that they can be distracted, that they can be agitated, and it might have absolutely, in more cases than not, nothing to do with you as an individual. So it's so important to also not take these things personally, but instead to be able to look at it and go, well, what has happened to this person and how can I support them? Next slide, please. So when we are talking about language, I'm just showing you a few here of some of my pet peeves of language that has been used in the past, but also still is very much used to describe the people that we support. So as you can see, there are some ones that I'm sure in the past you might have used, or you know colleagues that have used them, such as attention seeking, controlling, manipulative, the good old hard to engage, that they're withdrawn from the service, they're being aggressive. But if we put a trauma-informed lens on it, we recognise that actually this behaviour is what they have developed as coping strategies and mechanisms in order to survive the trauma that they have experienced. And it's their form of either protecting themselves before they jump in and trust, or that they have no understanding of how else to behave. So when we think about seeking attention, that they are potentially constantly trying to get hold of you because they constantly want to know what's going on, that actually what they're wanting is to understand that they are important to you, that out of your 70 plus cases, they matter. And they are trying to form an attachment and a bond because that is something that they haven't had before. They're trying to understand what that looks like. So in cases like that, it could very well be you going, okay, well, just sending them a message in the morning saying, these are the things that I'm going to be doing today and I will let you know, instead of them feeling like they're constantly hounding you. Things like manipulative behavior or being controlling. Well, actually, if they've never had any control of their own choices, their own lives, decisions, they haven't felt that way, this is a way of them being able to try and hold on to something and try and get some kind of control over part of their decision making and their life. When we talk about things like that someone was really hard to engage with, I would always flip that and say, well, perhaps it's actually the service that's hard to engage with, because all they're trying to do is potentially keep a distance because they don't know that they can trust you. Just because you are the professional doesn't mean that automatically gives trust. That does need to be earned. It needs to be earned through doing and action and empathy, non-judgment, building those relationships in order to be able to ensure that someone feels safe enough to engage with you and the service. Because remembering that for many of the people that you support, you are not the first person they will have come into contact with. You might be their 6th, 7th probation practitioner or caseworker or mentor, whatever it might be. So if they've been let down potentially by some of those other, in their eyes, in their view, why should they now trust you? So if we flip it on that head and look at it through that way, you go, actually, what do I need to do to be able to support them so that they will learn to trust me? And the same with things like being aggressive or being rude. It's recognizing that actually that's a behavior that's been learned because they're either afraid of that rejection, of being let down again. So they will push away first. Next slide, please. So again, what can you do? So shift the language that we use to describe client behavior. That all behavior is a form of communication that says something has happened to me. And it is our job to find out what and how best we can support that person. So we use language that provides a rationale and normalizes the process and provides an explanation as to why we are asking this information, why we are asking this question, why we are going through this process. So that they understand that actually it's not them only. That actually this is a process that you have to go through with everyone that you are supporting that is on probation. But ensure that you show that they have a choice. A choice might not always be a good choice. It might be, well, you engage and we really support you, or you don't engage and you're recalled. It might not be the choice that they want, but it's still a choice, and it's still them being able to make that decision based on an understanding that they know the consequences of both the good and the bad, and then they make that decision. And actually, if they don't always make the right one, because we learn from our own mistakes, they come back and we go, okay, well, what can we learn from that? Because there's always things we can learn about the choices that we've made. And especially for those who potentially have never been offered a choice before, that's incredibly empowering, but it needs to be done with support. And that we use strength-based conversations, and we recognize that actually they have survived, they have got to this point, and that there is strength in that, and it's recognizing that, and it's highlighting some of their transferable skills, but also what do they want to achieve? What do they want to get out of this? Because actually it might be really small things, and start small, and build on that, but recognize and celebrate when things have gone well. And show confidence when asking the questions. And I think sometimes when we're asking questions that we think might be particularly traumatic or might raise or trigger someone, we shy away from it, or we show that we're really nervous. And actually, if we show that we're nervous when asking a question, or if we apologize for asking a question, then actually sometimes that can make someone think, oh my God, there's something wrong with this question. I think I'm going to put my walls up and I'm not going to go anywhere near it. Or they think that there might be shame associated with it. But actually, you have confidence. If you have a reason for asking that question, you explain why and you ask the question. Be blunt, be to the point, and ask the question. But recognize that you need to explain why you are asking the question. But do not portray shame in asking the question or the answer that is given. And be sensitive, like I said, and to the point. But do not show that you are nervous or anxious about those questions. Or, more importantly, the answer. Because actually how you respond to an answer of someone, potential disclosure, could either open up allow them to open up to you and feel that they can trust you, or it could bring down all of their walls and they might not disclose again for a while. And in some cases, we know that for women in particular who go and seek support around domestic abuse and sexual violence, that sometimes by having a negative response to an answer that they give about their trauma can set them back about 5 to 7 years of seeking help again. So do ask about your clients' expectations and their hopes and their concerns and what they want to get out of it, but also how best they might want to be worked with. Everyone is different. No one size fits all. Recognize that they need maybe a different way of communicating than others might do. Some people are more visual learners. Some people need bite-sized chunks of information because a lot can be overwhelming. So recognize that and work with the person to be able to understand how best to work together. And don't assume that you already know what they need or what they want. Just because you think something should be important to them doesn't mean it is. And if you don't address what they identify as important first, they either won't get to the thing that is really important or in your eyes is really important, but they might disengage completely because they don't feel that you are meeting their needs.